up? It's Donut, and you tuning in to all your Illuminati news. And we are here back again with James Tunney. James, how are you?
I'm great, Donna. I was thinking of that Alice in Wonderland where she says it's always jam tomorrow, jam yesterday, but never jam today. But we'll give them jam today on your donut.
Oh, yes. The last video that you presented on the Quincunx, the X, the Elite War for Your Soul. That's
Yeah,
what he came up with that title. I was like, what do we title this? And
yeah,
because I was like 100% proof of X sorcery.
yes,
This video, oh my goodness, it was so much fun editing it, and just the quincunx. It opened up so much to the symbolism that I've been looking at. I've been calling it portal symbolism,
yes. I like it.
and
Yeah.
I'm trying to see if I have a slide of. I don't think I have it here, but I'll find it. Um, Maybe I could pull it up real quickly. The day music died. Buddy Holly,
Yes. Yeah.
his last concert poster. His last concert poster is the Quincunx, and right here, it's
Yeah. Interesting.
y-
Yeah.
yeah. So I that the dice,
Mhm.
right? The circle with that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it just did connect a lot of dots for me. And what are we going to get into? What are we going to get
Well,
into today?
in many ways, the quincunx is a distorted reflection, and it's a distorted reflection of the Christian story. So, what my belief is that we haven't really understood elements of the Christian story properly, not least people who are Christian, not least pastors who talk about this thing. So, I'm not saying I'm right, but what I'm saying is that an esoteric approach explains some of the things in the Christian story better than some people understand, and also that actually this story, sometimes called the greatest story ever told, foretells what's happening now, and it foretells what's happening in the next few years. Strangely, and when you're talking about symbols, again, William Butler Yeats, when he talked about in his essay on magic, he explains that our minds access the great minds through symbols. So symbols are critical. Now, immediately people say, but of course, or some people say that the Christian story is a myth. It's not true. Now, I would caution people to look at the scholarship on this. Whatever view you come to, bear in mind that there are many political agendas that need to destroy Christianity and the Judeo Christian worldview. So you have to be careful. There's a lot of money being invested, both from the right and the left, from a materialist perspective, to deny this story, to convince you that it's a myth. And even if you believe that it didn't happen in the way that we're told, well, then you have to explain it in mythological terms, which demands that you look at it a bit closer. Because if we think of, say, the Prometheus story, which is in many ways associated with the opposite side, the story we looked at last time. Well, the Promethean side is not something that in any way could have happened. It's obviously mythological. Nobody has met Prometheus. Prometheus has appeared to nobody that I know of. There's no history of it. Whereas in the Christian story, it's a lot different. So I say, firstly, if you look at the scholarship, and if you bear in mind that the great mythologists like C.S. Lewis and Tolkien believed it to have happened, and they know about mythology, that, and we can also take the idea of C.S. Lewis, who said that this is a true myth, a mythic story that actually happened. Now, if you don't believe that it happened, it still requires that we look at it in mythological terms. And that, in many ways, put a higher burden. If you're a student of literature, you'll find that there's many books written about the classics. So this story, as the greatest story ever told, as it's called, demands that we look at it. Now, how do we look at mystical things? How do we look at esoteric symbols? I would cast our mind back to the early 1600s. We go back about 400 years. And there's two books that are significant of a similar era, similar time, about 400 years ago. And they both represent, in my view, kind of opposite approaches, the two sides that we're talking about, the distorted reality of the X-sorcery and the true story. Now, first of all, for people that don't know this, the X in the X-sorcery mirrors or is a simulacrum of Christ. One of the main symbols for Christ was X, as we see in Xmas, because it's the first letter in the Greek Christos. So X would have meant Christian in the past, and this is why the sorcerers have to invert it. So that's an important thing to bear in mind. So that's why X is so significant, a starting point. Now, then, if we come to how we interpret myths and magic, Jacob Boehme, who wrote The Signature of All Things, which I think was published it was published in 1651. He wrote it about 1621. He was a Protestant shoemaker, and he had a vision, very much like Philip K. Dick. He sees light on a pewter dish, and he gets a download of information. So 350 years before Philip K. Dick, who we will talk about, before he had his vision in 1974, Jacob Boehme, who wrote the Signature of All Things, had this vision, and he had a download. And he began to understand that everything in the world has signatures, has signs. So his doctrine of signatures was a classic doctrine. And he explained that the signature of God is in all things. So you have to learn how to look at things. Now, Jacob Boehme influenced many of the great philosophers. He was a big influence on Emanuel Swedenborg. Emanuel Swedenborg is the founder of a lot of spiritualism of the 19th and 20th century. A great scientist, a great mystic, very much informed by Jacob Boehme, as was Steiner, as was Yeats. So he's a very big influence. So he says that you have to really understand the signs, and if you don't understand the signs that are presented to you in their esoteric meaning, that you won't understand what the doctrines are about. And Emanuel Swedenborg explained this in a number of different ways. He said, when you read the Bible, you have to remember that there are different layers, and the main inspiration he took from his mystical communications with God was that you can't take the Bible literally, or that there is different dimensions that you have to look at. So there are, if you like, subtexts below it. So that's the interpretive context. So at the same time that Jacob Boehme was trying to explain to us how we have the possibility of inner realization of God and communication, and in particular through signs and symbols, we have Francis Bacon writing the New Atlantis. Now, Francis Bacon, the great scientist who wrote the New Atlantis, laid out 400 years ago the plan for the scientific control of the world that informed H.G. Wells, that informed the Royal Society. It was a vision of a technocratic society run by scientists, run through an intelligent system. And this is really the basis of the New World Order in many senses. So these appeared at the same time. And we have this process of symmetry, that where we have an anticipation, if you like, a divinely inspired anticipation, and then we have the thing from the side who want to create a representation of the divine. Now, there's another phrase that comes from medieval times that's useful for people to understand. It's called the aping of Christ. And aping in this sense means the copying or creation of a simulacrum. So in many ways, we have the Christ system and we have the anti-stroke Christ system, which I believe the New World Order is. It aims to destroy, ultimately, the Christian culture and the Judeo-Christian culture in particular, and all religions, not Islam as well, will not be tolerated under this new system. So all spiritual traditions, they will play them off each other, but they're going to destroy them. So we have those two systems, if you like, the sorceress system and the original system. So the question is, what was the story of Jesus Christ telling us for today? Did it anticipate this sorceress attack? Did it anticipate what was going to happen? And in many senses, we might argue that the Christian story was set for about 2,000 years. Now, people thought that meant the millennium was the crucial date, but I believe that the Christian era, in its present form, was meant to end 2,000 years after the death of Christ, which then ties it into the predictions of the singularity, the 2030 agenda. All the agendas come to fruition about the time of the 2,000 years after the death of Christ. And I think that's deliberately meant to be. At that stage, the main thing there is not about the autonomy of machines, really. It's about their control of us, because your individuality is gone when this singularity happens. Though they try and say it's about spirituality, certainly the bosses may have some transhumanist capabilities if they keep working on it. But really, the controlling elite will have us under control. Now, I believe this is predicted in the story of Christ. So just cast our mind back to some of the elements. I can't focus on them all, but some of the key elements which I think are underestimated in the interpretation of the story of Christ. At the start of his ministry, he comes and meets the fishermen, okay? And he gets them to lay aside their nets. And he gets them to lay aside their nets. Now, the net, as we've talked about last week, is critical. It's a critical symbol. You leave the net aside because you're going to become fishers of men. So this is a different idea. This is an idea of linkage at a spiritual, non-physical level. So there's a deliberate symbolism in that. Leave the nets behind, and the nets are critical. So every time we see these things, we see a copying of them, of the nomenclature of the names. So they become fishers of men, and this is a critical symbol. The symbol of the fish and the story of the fish permeates the story of Jesus Christ. So in early Christianity, he was described as the big fish by some of the theorists. And many of the miracles are associated with fish, the loaves and the fishes. When he comes back after the resurrection, he eats a fish meal. So this fish symbolism is important. If you don't believe this has happened, if you don't believe these events were true in any way, then you have to explain, well, why was this focused on the fish? And then you would have to look at comparative mythology. Now, one place, people want to look at Greece, but they tend to look at imperial structures or countries that were empires. I would suggest that we look at the Celtic nations. And remember, there is a story that Jesus came to Britain. That's why William Blake, now that's not necessary for my argument, but it shows the connections between Israel and Ireland and Britain. And so much so that many believe they were the lost tribe of Israel in Britain, which was important for the concept of Israelites. But there was a tin trade, which is proven, there's no doubt about it, going on for thousands of years between Cornwall, Ireland, and that area, which is why the early monastic tradition in Ireland was associated with Egypt. So this connection was critical. In the Irish legends, there is a story about fish, and it contextualizes what fish is. And it appears in different form in the Welsh. So in the Irish legends, we have the salmon of knowledge. So here is a critical connection. A salmon of knowledge, I won't go into the story, but basically it involved a wise man who's seeking this salmon that has eaten nuts that's fallen from the hazel trees. and anyone that eats this fish will become enlightened, if you like. So it ends up that a boy who's helping him, called Fionn, eats by accident of the fish, or he gets some of the fish into his mouth in a number of different ways, according to the stories. But he eats it by accident, and he gets the knowledge. So here we have a connection between the fish and a sudden download of knowledge, and this is a critical motif in relation to a number of different stories. So the fish is associated with this enlightenment. Now, when we think of, if you want to think of it, to jump aside with the motif, if anyone is familiar with the story of Philip K. Dick, who wrote the books that led to Blade Runner and Total Recall, and he wrote his great novels, Valis, Flow Gently, My Tears, all those books, The Man in the High Castle. One of his, he had one mystical experience in 1963, which was important, but the big experience in 1974 was when he was answering a door to a girl who's bringing him his pain relief from the chemist or pharmacist. He opens the door, he meets her, she has a symbol on her, a pink beam of light hits the symbol, hits his mind, and it changes his life forever. So he ends up writing the exegesis of Philip K. Dick, but again, kind of fish symbol on the, trying to understand what happened here. The symbol was the fish. The symbol was this fish symbol. So this fish symbol did the same thing that a pewter dish did to Jacob Burma. Now, in early Christianity, we had this fish symbol, okay? Now, when he saw this, he got an immediate sense of being back in early Christianity, or the time when Christianity was separating somewhat from Judaism. There was still a lot of crossovers the early time. He got a sense that he was back in the catacomb. The empire was still in charge, all his visions. And from there, he began to understand that the empire hadn't gone away. He began to anticipate and understand that we were going to live in a tyranny, and that was going to continue. But this fish symbol, he knew it was connected with early Christians, and also he recognized the Vesica Piscis or Vesica Piscis. Now, the Vesica Piscis or Piscis is created by the intersection of two circles. It's a very, very important esoteric symbol. We have numbers, a lot of numbers associated together. It's associated with fish, obviously. We have a lot of numbers associated there, like 153. Christ sends out the apostles to get fish when they couldn't get fish, and they come back with 153 fish. The symbolism, continues. But this Vesica Piscis is seen to be critical. Now, it's seen to be a feminine or a female symbol, which obviously is. But we can make some mistakes in relation to what this is. If we look at the Christian symbol, which is slightly different than the symbol that impacted on Philip K. Dick, it's got two arcs, but it's open at the end. So the Christian symbol in that one is the ictus. Now we see the X for Christus, and the ictus refers to, it's an acrostic that refers to Jesus Christ, son of God, Savior. So the words spelled fish and represented Jesus. So we have this effort to continue this motif, which was obviously critical and obviously deeper, and probably in the esoteric ways they're explaining. It also, in some ways, reminds me in some versions of an eye. It's the eye of Horus and eyes that were around. But this is the symbol that's taken over. Now, if you want to see what the meaning of the Christ symbol is, you can also look at what the Antichrists or Antichrist system symbols may be. And by the Antichrist system, I mean the totality of the military industrial complex, big tech, big pharma, all that kind of stuff, the corporatist system. Now, what I began to notice a few years ago was that there was a recurrent distorted infinity symbol that's used as a trademark by many of these companies. Mega, for example, or Meta is the Facebook thing, whatever they're called. this symbol, and also Neuralink have a similar system. And you say, well, why do these people who are involved in this kind of, which I believe taken over, why do they have this symbol? What does this mean? Now, I believe it's crystal clear when you look at the evidence what this means. Now, intentionally or not, we'd say. For me, it represents the joining of the individual into the system. It involves the joining of your neurological system, as we've talked about, into the external system. It involves the process of endosymbiosis, which is obviously what Neuralink is doing by forming this connection. Now, the X also indicates how your nervous system works. It's a decussate system where the nerves cross. We know that. We know our left hand controls the right, the left brain controls the right, and vice versa. So this symbolizes this. So this symbolizes for me the control of the human mind by external systems. How does that relate to the symbol of the ictus, of the fish? And what was the fish esoterically telling us? We know it was about knowledge. We know it was about spiritual liberation. And there's also that wagon wheel there with 8 and 1 around at 9. But in some of the, as you brought up there, if you see there, on the last one, and the black and white one that you had before that, you see on 159, look at this, the ictus on that one. Notice that the tail is pointing upwards. And I think this was the crucial element of the symbology. So it's pointing upwards. Now, I believe if they were taken out, there wouldn't be that the cross at the end. So what does this mean? I believe, after having studied a long time and what the symbology means, is that the symbol of the fish was a description of the human as a spiritual receptor, that we are designed to be receivers of higher consciousness. That,
oh wow,
that like in the story of Cana, this is also similar to a pitcher. This is the story of the water becoming wine. It's the same symbology. That this is about receiver. Now, what is one common description or translation of what Kabbalah means is reception. Right. All the esoteric traditions are telling us that we are receivers. Now, if you get a thinking cap on, if you think about thinking cap in school, they say, you used to say, put on your thinking cap, mean think better. Well, to think about it, it's quite interesting. There is the God's helmet, which says that you can simulate a mystical experience by Persinger and people like that, an actual device. But what is happening with this system, this neurological control system, is a cap is being put on your consciousness. So initially through censorship and control of the media, but later through actual control of your nervous system. So that the cap is the other element which is in the symbology of a lot of these companies, of the distorted infinity symbol. So the cap put on, if you like, the fish symbol is a fundamental change. The cap, if you like, joining the two open-ended bits of the fish, closes human spirituality. That's what its function is. It will close your capacity to be a spiritual being. So when that open end of the upside down fish is closed into the distorted infinity sign, then you are controlled. That's what cybernetics is about. That's what the whole study of control with machines of human behavior and animal behavior is about, is securing your connection to a control system, which is for the good of the machine, which integrates you and effectively deprives you of your spiritual capacity.
Wow.
So I say that this is not an accident, that the story is telling us about our consciousness And if we like to see it as an eye in that sense, consistent with the eye of Horus, the eye is your spiritual eye, which will be closed in that context. And this is a fundamental theme in the story of Christ, healing the blind, making the blind see. It's also deeper about spiritually seeing. And when he goes on his ministry, if you look at the description of his ministry, most of what he's doing is helping people who are psychically ill he's trying to dispossess them of spirits. He's trying to help people with certain seizures. He's aiming at their psychic state. That's what his mission is. It's clear. So we see that he's heavily involved in consciousness. It's not primarily a story about what the law is, because he's coming to add to or to clarify what the law is about. Whether you want to say love God, love your neighbor, or whatever way. But it's primarily about your consciousness. So, and there if we say that's this, or one of them would represent the Sermon on the Mount.
Yes.
If we think about that, which is one of the most famous speeches of all time, the bit which is not really well dealt with, so they say, "Blessed be the poor in spirit, and the meek shall inherit the earth," and that which is more interesting than if we consider that some other time. But what these things mean. But he says in that something which is crucial, which vindicates my view of the interpretation of this as being about consciousness. He says, "Ye are the salt of the earth." And then he goes on to say, "Ye are the light of the world." Well, how do we reconcile them? So in one of the most important times when he's speaking, he says, "Ye are the salt of the earth." And then goes on to say that ye are the light of the world. Well, how does that go together? What does that mean? And he says, as you said there, ye the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. So how does that relate to light? Now, there's another interesting thing, that this is also reflected in the Quran, a similar idea. Now, my interpretation, and I think it's justified, is if we look at the idea of signatures, what these things mean. You see that salt was an idea which was fundamental in alchemy. So when Burma is talking about salt, he's talking in alchemical terms, but this is about the soul that Carl Jung began to realize. So what does it mean that ye are the salt of the earth? What it means is that humans in their physical form, incarnated, are fundamentally crystalline beings. We're made of crystals. Salt is crystal. It's a classic reference to crystals. Now, a lot of people don't understand that they are crystals. They're crystalline structure, or many of the important functions work through crystals. And in particular, we have liquid crystals operate your nervous system. And the Antichrist system has been working on these, in particular with X-ray crystallography, to try and unlock the secrets. They know it's about crystals. DNA is really about the study of crystals. X-ray crystallography enabled them to look into the structure of crystals and to be able, therefore, to come up with great insights, great physical insights. What were the things that they began to study in Britain in particular? If you look at J.D. Bernal. So J.D. Bernal, that wrote The World of Flesh and the Devil, and of course, Kepler wrote about, in the 17th century too, about the structure of snow and crystals and its various forms. Bernal, when he comes to study crystals, and he's involved in the system, and he's involved in the New World Order, he began to look at salt. He began to look at chitin that we've talked about, and he began to lay the foundations for the unlocking of DNA. So they took these things seriously. They know that there's a deeper meaning in this as well. So we are, what it means is that if our crystalline composition is interfered with, we can lose our saltiness. We can lose our capacity to function as receptors, because we are receptors. And if you think that crystals are just for the New Age hippie shops, I'd refer you to a book called, I think it's called Crystal Clear, which and the study of crystals in relation to the war effort. And the argument is that crystals, that's it, yeah. Crystals are critical in communications. The argument in that book is that quartz and other crystals were the most critical component in the war effort. That's hard for people to understand.
Wow.
But quartz and crystals are critical because you use them. You can make a radio with certain types of crystals. They have resonance. We can communicate at a distance. Every esoteric tradition knows that. That's why we're fascinated. If you look at lasers are based on rubies. All these crystals had high-tech applications. They're related to the crystalline form. Crystalline form gives magic. In fact, there are some theories, and it looks like a snake there around there, but there's some theories that some of the descriptions about the Ark of the Covenant were referring to actual knowledge of the use of crystals to do things. So this idea, this significance of crystal is being told to us. But you are crystal. But if they interfere with your crystal, you will lose your saltiness and you will not be able to be this receiver. Then it says, ye are the light of the world. So the salt refers to our physical composition, and the light refers to our inherent nature. I've written about this and tried to explain that all the traditions tell us that you are light, actually, and that's the nature. This is the same thing in the Quran, that we're reflections of the divine light. There's a special description there, and the implication is that we reflect that. All the traditions say that that we are light in some way. All the mystical experiences are associated with light, and we've already referred to Burma, and we've already referred to Philip K. Dick. In the non-canonical gospel, the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, if they ask you where you came from, say that you came from the place where light came into being of its own accord. This is telling us that we are light in our nature. We're in this form, we're incarnated in this form, which is very important. And that's what the Christian story tells us, that we have to keep this form. We can't give up this form, no matter how we want to change things about us. This form is critical in relation to its receptivity. But we are light, we're composed of light, we're from light, and we want to go back to it. Now, the Antichrist system wants to decompose your physical structure and turn you into electricity, basically. It wants to bring you into a different form so that you are entrapped and cannot recover this. This is what the thing is. So I would suggest, before I go further, that the fundamental construction of the symbology is about this idea of the deep association between fish, knowledge, enlightenment. We know about the connection between the fish and the brain, and it's pointing to the structure, the crystal structure of us, as explained in those passages that we've talked about. And
Wow.
it indicates why they are so interested in crystals, why magicians and sorcerers are so interested in crystals, why Bernal and many of the other Stalinist scientists were crystallographers. They're searching to create the new. There you go again. Your X there, and the quincunx even. They're trying to have a new genesis, to reframe the creation, to be the new creation. Because in many senses, if you look at St. Paul, he's kind of indicating that Jesus was bringing in the new world. So now they're saying, no, that wasn't the new world. This is about our new world. And we have the order of control, the elite, which will control it. And the last point, if we look at what the dark reflection of this fish is, there's one more. So Jesus was asked for a sign and he wouldn't give one, but the only sign he would give was the sign of Jonah.
Oh.
So the sign of Jonah was that Jonah was taken into the whale for 3 days, and he was anticipating what would happen with the resurrection. But again, it's the fish thing. So the fish is the thing they're fighting against. The fish. So there's something about this fish and sea monster. So what's the sea monster? Where would we find the sea monster? Now the question is, can we find an equivalent story, an equivalent mythology, an equivalent practice in the, if you like, the adversary system, not to call it the Antichrist system, the adversarial system, the system of the adversary, which includes a satanic approach, the Promethean approach, the Luciferian approach, whatever, Baal, Moloch, Mammon, all those things put into. Is there, and of course we come to Leviathan, which we can, in Jewish tradition, a great sea monster. So the strange thing is, when we come to Leviathan in the adversary system, in the system that anticipates the New World Order, we see the Leviathan is a good thing. So hence we get Thomas Hobbes writing the Leviathan. What is the Leviathan? The Leviathan is the all-powerful sovereign state that has total control over your life on the basis of a theoretical social contract. Really, that's no social contract. The Leviathan is this brutal beast that supposedly for your good you have given up your freedom to. So the Leviathan is the control system. And this is the basis of a lot of politics, political theory. But it's very, very strange to choose a Leviathan. So the Leviathan also, if we look at the Leviathan as described by Hobbes, it consists of an artificial soul. And these are the words he uses, an artificial soul, which anticipates a few hundred years later the argument that we will be governed by artificial intelligence, by an artificial soul. It's directly in that genre. So I say that the Leviathan by Hobbes and New Atlantis, because where is New Atlantis? Where do the scientists live? They live in Atlantis, in the sea. They live in a new state of Atlantis, which this time they'll be able to control, but it's in the sea. So we have this strange juxtaposition between the fish as the liberating symbol of knowledge and the dark monster of that's of the state, of the corporate form, of the collection of scientists. And there's another little in between. There's 2 points. Well, maybe 3. There's 2 points in there. The attack on the nervous system, according to people like Michael Nehls, Nehls, who've written about the indoctrinated brain recently, he says that what the attack is the attack on the hippocampus. And the attack on the hippocampus, because that's our location of sense of self, of memory, of who we are. And strangely, the hippocampus, goes back to Greek mythology, and it means it was seen to reflect this mythical creature, which is half horse and half sea monster, like a seahorse.
Oh, wow.
So the hippocampus has this combination of a fish and something else. And even, so that's a strange in-between connection about the recurrent symbols. And even strangely, when we look to international politics, this is a big thing that explains Ukraine very, very simply. If we look from a Russian perspective, they are the land power. They can't be defeated on land. This is the theory that has existed for hundreds of years. You cannot defeat the Russian Empire. It is the controller of the land. Who is the controller of the sea? Well, it's the West. It's NATO, who has a direct connection to the ideas of Atlantis. They are the sea power. They are the sea monster. Where was it predicted that the battle, the crux would be? It was predicted by, mystically, if you like, by Father Malachi Martin, but strategically by Brzezinski, who wrote the Technotronic Society. It would come down to Ukraine. If Ukraine is taken, well, then the sea powers secure dominance of the world. They can move on from there. So in the move to globalization, the control of Ukraine becomes critical for a number of reasons. It's where the land and the sea monsters clash. The last point here, it involves Tolkien, who understood all these things, who understood many of these things. And if you read about Tolkien, he used to have nightmares about Atlantis. And if you look a bit closer, I believe that what he was having nightmares about was the same thing that C.S. Lewis was having nightmares about, was about this new scientocracy, this new control function, which was associated with the new Atlantis, Francis Bacon, which was taking control. And that North Atlantic bridge between the United States and Britain and around the old Commonwealth, old empire, that was the basis of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. In the early documents, they explain that they are going to create something for the machine world. That's in the documentation. So, in many senses, the force which is moving towards globalization has co-opted and plays with these symbols because they want to draw power from them. Just as, if you like, traditional Satanism is an inversion of, say, the Catholic Mass. The Black Mass is an inversion of the Catholic Mass as opposed to some kind of theatrical thing. So the creation of the new world has to destroy, corrupt, and assimilate the previous statements. Before I go on and explain what the passion is about, if I may, I should stop for a few minutes to let you talk. And I won't apologize this time, but
yeah, no, I mean, when you're talking about the salt, I mean, it's interesting how we have 12 salts, like there's the 12 apostles, there's the 12 months, and there's 12 cell salts. And then when you like burn a body down to its like final thing, it's we're salt too. When you like break it down to the final component, it's salt. Yeah. So salt was a currency. And do you think that this being written about thousands of years ago, do you think that this is something that happens like this isn't a new phenomenon, that this does just continuously happens, or do you think this is the first time this is happening?
Yeah, I don't think there's any. What I think is, and strangely, it's a bit like the two arcs in the two arcs in the Ictus, that we're at the point now where there is a prediction, a prophecy of our present times, which I hope to explain. And we come to the point where you're going to be given a choice in some way. Now, for many people, it won't be. It'll be a slow descent, and the opportunity will be gone. Their saltiness will be lost, if you like. But humanity is given a choice now about the two directions. You go the machine route, and you effectively will create a hellish situation. It's not what our destiny is meant to be. Or you can choose the spiritual route. It really is That simple. You accept a materialist viewpoint. Don't go beyond that. Nothing supernatural, nothing spiritual, nothing esoteric. And that's we're going to get more pronounced. Or you realize who you are. You realize that you are spiritual consciousness, created of the highest, a fractal of the highest thing, a hologram of the highest thing, a reflection of the divine. All the traditions say that, and that's true.
I love it when you said that, the reflection of the divine. I mean, that was so you took that. There was other people that even wrote that that verbiage, the reflection of the divine.
In the perennial tradition, there's many different ways of saying the same thing. Or create imago Dei, created in the image of God, create they're all saying the same thing. They're saying that you're not an accidental piece of biology that just happened and struggled. And here's another thing connected with this, and you see it in books like the Creatures of Cain, for example, about scientific dispute, the hunt for human nature in Cold War America. This idea that we're apes. We're not apes. We're not. The idea this is, and it's part of the aping of Christ. Instead of saying you're divine creation, you say you're nothing but an ape. And this is what they've been saying to Irish people for hundreds of years, your chimpanzee, whatever, all this kind of stuff. It's about an evolutionary context, but it's also about this aping, this literally simulacrum of the real thing. And this is about this was about a big dispute in evolutionary biology about human nature, and the argument was very, very big. It says, well, humans are just violent apes that use tools, and it's not an accurate description. And in fact, most of the violence comes from the people who are making this claim, from the scientists who are developing the bomb, the Promethean bomb. These mass murderers are calling the people they're murdering violent apes, and they're using this Promethean power to destroy them, which is consistent. They want to. Many of them in this system don't like humans. They're misanthropic. So that was a wrong direction. It's not about evolution. It's not about the necessity of getting involved in the evolution thing. It's about an accurate scientific description of who we are now. So I resist this when they say, well, you're just, we're just violent apes, and look, and all this, so much emphasis in evolutionary biology and sociobiology, fundamentally linked with a lot of nasty doctrines that they're very good. They're very good to forget. And for example, there was more discussion this time, I've written about before, about Unit 731 in Japan. And that was a horrible, one of the worst ever. Unit 731. And this is, scientists say, oh, you're the Catholic, say, for example, to me, well, you're somehow responsible for what happened in the Inquisition. And then they inflate the figures massively. They don't read what happened. They don't take responsibility for these, about how they experimented on humans. There's the quincunx in it again.
Look, right there.
It's shocking. The experiments that happened on many Chinese people was absolutely horrific. I mean, you won't sleep if you read properly what happened there.
I never even heard of this before.
It's some of the grimmest experiments by scientists for science. They never take responsibility for these things. Now, I've been to China a few times, but
and then the quincunx right there.
And not only that, look at Unit 731.
Right.
It's the inverse of 137. Now, I argue that 137 is the secret of the universe, numerologically. Pauli, Jung, and other people looked at that. 137 is associated with the fine structure constant, and 137 is a figure that explains physiologically why we are here, how we exist. It's in all most of the traditions of 1, 3, a trinity, and 7 something and sacred things. It's critical number. This is an inversion, and the number 137, Pauli and Jung discussed that. They knew it was a secret. Richard Feynman understood that it was a basis of the mysteries, and in many ways, again, 137 points to a divine source. It points to the divine meaning, divine truth. It's a divine sign, and it's vindicated in a lot of science. They keep coming back to this 137, 137 to 1, and that ratio. It's critical, and I believe also that it is the 1 unit, 3 units, and 7 units in separate hierarchy. But you have that juxtaposition all the time, weird juxtapositions between horrific scientist things. The horror that we face will come from a lot of scientists, unethical, that have no moral scruples. These are the people that we should be afraid. And I know there's a 33rd prime number. Again, we won't go into it because we'll be there for ages. We'll talk about some other time maybe. But it's critical when you look through it in science as well, and they know that.
Wow.
Yeah. So you have all these inversions and all the time, and you can look at the inversions sometimes to direct you towards what's in the true mirror, or what things to look at, what things to pay attention to.
Right.
I think the place to go from there is to explain what I think the passion, how the passion of Christ justifies this interpretation of the human as a spiritual being and a spiritual consciousness. I don't know if that's okay with you, or if you have any questions you want to.
Well, the Carl Jung, psyche is the soul. What I've learned through a psyche change from addiction, to get off addiction, what Carl Jung said was you need a psyche change. And if psyche meant the soul to him, that means I need a soul change. So with Christ, focus on conscience and the psyche, the soul, this is like a spiritual world that we live in, and if they depend on the spiritual world for healing, and that story of Christ healing people, and the radio. I'm not sure if you looked into the radio, but there's a connection, I believe, with the transmission of the same way a radio works is sort of how our soul works, in a sense. I've heard from some people talk about that, that there's a transmit. I don't know it too well, but I've heard that, and I it's interesting.
The only thing I would say is that our spiritual consciousness is the foundation. The image of the divine is of the highest substance that's behind everything. So the electrical worlds and that are a reflection of the higher things, but not it. They can suppress us, but they can't be it. They can never recreate that thing because we're of the prime material, the original substance. That's what we are, the reflect. That's what's telling us. So all of these things are reflect in some way what the bigger picture is. So though there is a connection, there is analogies, and that's why the materialist thinks they can control all these things if they have the physical thing, but they've neglected this feature. And also, like with John Lilly and interventions, like with Philip K. Dick, like with Jacob Boehme, if we're open, like the fish again, and we're open, we can receive these things, which will give us the power to deal with anything that happens. The antidote comes from, and the poison comes. They come together. Like the snake and the venom, etc. They come together. So yes, that those analogies are certainly made, and that's why they're trying to limit us, because they're trying to close. Because that's the difference between a system with feedback and a system without feedback. We have divine feedback that we don't get in the other systems, because they will close us, and they will close us down to higher influences, so that we're just automatons. So that's the problem, and those analogies are certainly there. You're right about that. A lot of people have looked.
Well, now the social media, the internet, there's so much noise. And do you have any recommendations of connecting with the divine, connecting with God? Because sometimes I get neurotic or depressed, and to get out of that, I got actions to get out of that. But I like to know from you, how do you get connected? I know I used to meditate. I don't meditate anymore. I'll pray. Like I'll do a quick prayer to God. What do you want me to do? Very simple. But the more I work, the more I'm on the internet, the more noises come in and the more distractions. Do you got any suggestions on grounding and connecting with God, connecting with this ultimate source?
To keep oneself in good mind in order to be receptive, we have to do simple things. For example, during the summer, I'll spend probably a couple of months sleeping on the ground out in tents and things like that. And connecting with the ground is very, very important because it affects your resonance. A lot of people don't want to do things like that, but you have to have some connection. I'll try and swim a couple of hundred times during the year in the lakes, and then that gives me there is an idea that in Irish practice that the lake can speak to you. They talk about the tongue of the lake, and these things, your awareness increases when you're out in nature. They want to keep us out of nature. They want to keep us out of the sun. They want to keep us away from water. And these are all the simple things that we need connection with. We need to do things with our hands. We need to be able to use ourselves, because out of your hands, again, the hands is critical in the Jesus story, and laying on the hands and that, because the hands direct your will, and they also express yourself. They get the energy out. For some people, that might be, I used to do a bit of grappling, for example, and when you're using your hands in judo or in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, you begin to use different elements of your physiology. So physically, you have to use your body. Walking is critical. Walking is the best way. I know it sounds silly. People say walk. Walking is what we're meant to do. This is
I
what
tell
our body
everybody that. Yeah. No.
Nature is beautiful. It's not an ugly world. A lot of Gnostics are telling us, this is a horrible world. It's a beautiful world. Read poetry. Go out and look. I've been painting a house the last few days. It's beautiful that when you're out there minding your own business, scraping out paint off a 100-year-old house and bringing making it anew, looking up at the clouds and it's so beautiful. Apart from whatever they're doing up there, but anyway, the creation, or whatever you want to call it, is so beautiful. Get in touch with nature. In relation to spirituality, what you have to do is connect yourself to the highest thing possible. You have to believe in the highest thing possible. You have to attach yourself, because everything else can be taken away from you. We will be reduced to salt and ashes. But your commitment in the end of your life to the highest connects you to the highest. You can be seduced by a whole load of other little goblins if you want to do, but you might live in their world afterwards. I don't want to live in that world. I don't want to be a hungry ghost. So I believe in a divine spirit which is benign. I believe it's us who is distorting it, and systems which are distorting. And I don't let anyone tell you that you are not created in a divine image. And even there's a little slight problem with Jung. He talks about it as a psychological thing, the imago Dei. That's just a psychological projection. It's hard to. It's not. It's real. This is who we are. This spiritual consciousness, receptivity, openness to the divine, and the divine says it doesn't ask for much in many ways, despite what people will tell us. So this means there's all these laws and all that. It asks you to recognize that, It asks you to recognize other people. It asks you to recognize creation, the beauty of creation, as opposed to the polluted plastic technosphere that they want to create, the materialists want to create, all the ugly things, when we have to get better to align. So ultimately, the nature of spiritual realization is hope. It will hope and courage. Courage comes from the heart. That's what it means. So courage, you have it if you fill it with your commitment to the highest thing, because you cannot have fear of these things. A lot of these things are unpleasant. A lot of these things are nice, but you can't live in fear. Fear is the power that they have over you. Hope comes from, is inherent, and joyfulness is inherent in this commitment to yourself. So I don't believe that it brings us to the miserable place that a lot of religious people as well may bring us to. It doesn't. It's not consistent with the long history of understanding who we are and what powers we have. And then all the traditions say as well that when you commit to the path, that your spiritual gifts are given to you, your abilities increase. So commitment is important, and the belief is signified by we have time to talk about the Passion, do we?
Yes, please. Yeah, yes.
Okay. Yes. If you think about this,
and also the what you said in the last podcast that really I've been meditating on and thinking is the Curie. I think I might say it wrong, but caring rather than the Prometheus, the caring.
Yes,
That was huge for me.
So Ian McGilchrist explains about the dangers of the left brain and the right brain. Very, very good on that, and the master in his emissary and that. Now, I say, for example, give an example. Jesus is on the cross. We'll elaborate in a minute. Jesus is on the cross, and there's two robbers or revolutionaries beside him, on the left and the right. Now, if my theory is right, and that the brain motif, the spiritual consciousness motif, is right through it, we have another example here. So him in his fantastic 2-volume work, great scholarship, the Matter with Things, explains how the brain works from his great humane informed experience, and what's wrong with the left brain approach. He explains that. But in the story of Jesus, he's on the cross. So he has two robbers there, and initially both of them seem to be. It's not in all of them, but initially both seem to be hostile to him. And one of them says, "Well, if you're God, show us who you are, prove who you are, throw yourself down from the cross." Okay. And then the other one says, "Well, we're getting punished for what we did wrong. He did nothing wrong." And I believe, he effectively believed him. So he was asking for his support. And Jesus says, "Well, you'll be in paradise with me this day." Okay. So there was no rituals that early Christian or first Christian or, beyond the apostles or after the crucifixion. There was no rituals that he had to do. What he had was belief in what he saw or what he perceived. Now, if that is not a brilliant description of the difference between the left brain and the right brain, I don't know what is. The left brain says, "Prove to me, show me." The right brain says, "Well, okay, I'm after looking at this, and I intuit that you're it."
And man,
that story for me symbolizes, synopsizes, reduces. I'm not saying in any way belittles what McGilchrist adds to it, supports it. It explains it in that simple way, the difference between the two sides of the brain. And it's so beautifully illustrated by the story or by the events, which again is the true mythic base. And that's not sufficiently understood. So we know that one of the most successful medical interventions is placebo. Now, placebo proves scientifically the power of belief. So what the belief is ridiculed in many contexts. There are also, but really it's powerful. There are studies on the physiological impact of demoralization in the context of cancer sufferers and people having palliative care. And if you are demoralized, you won't fight. You see, again, you lose confidence, you lose enthusiasm, and you lose hope. What does enthusiasm mean? What does the word enthusiasm? And so demoralizing is really taking away a moral system, whatever, and that's what it meant originally. I know there's words morale and all that associated with it, but in the 1790s, demoralizing was actually a process, I think, that they were doing. What does enthusiasm mean? So enthusiastic people are successful people. It means being full of God. It refers to theos. The people that are enthusiastic were the people that were full of God. If you are full of, if you like, the divine, you will be. It's en theos is the etymology of the world of the word. So you have God in you, and you're enthusiastic. That's what the origin of that word is. So people who don't have spiritual belief get demoralized and are more easy to control, and they lose hope, they lose meaning. And if we look at the writings about the concentration camps, people who
Yes,
didn't have a sense of meaning didn't
absolutely.
survive, as Frankl talks about and that. So the gifts of understanding meaning means that we can persist, we can continue on. Now, I think you don't get meaning solely intellectually. That really meaning is associated with an intuitive, deep spiritual openness. So we get the gifts of survival, of endurance, of suffering through our awareness of the higher dimensions. So there's a direct relationship between them. And they know that. They know that they can control us easily once they take away to convince us that the story of Jesus was a myth, that, that they don't go on about the mythic dimension of Prometheus and therefore why it's so meaningless. They don't do that. They keep on telling you about Prometheus. They tell you about how important Prometheus is. They don't do the same thing for the Christian story, because Jung recognized that. Jung recognized that the concept of individuation came from Christ. Ivan Illich explained that the concept of life itself, as we understand in the West, came from the Christian tradition. So so the great thinkers explain that. Now, I want to shift, if I can,
Yes.
so I won't run out of time, to Golgotha and what it means. Now, Richard or Rudolf Steiner wrote about Golgotha and explained what it was. I think there's an extra dimension that we could add to it. There you go, Golgotha, the skull. We can see it referred to as cranion, Calvary. This is your Calvarium, the top of your head. There's the skull underneath. The skull is Adam, possibly Goliath as well, another one. So the skull is critical. So in this story, in this myth for people that don't believe it, but in this true story or true myth, but in the real story, in the thing itself, is this focus on the skull. It's in the name. It's no accident. Golgotha. And you see that when people who are interested in mystical people began to look at the story, they knew there was something about the skull. So when General Gordon went to try and find the tomb of Christ, he believed that it was there in that place, the place of the skull there, because there was a place that looked like the skull, although there was another dimension to it. So they know there's something about the skull. Philip K. Dick, our old friend, writes about this time, and he picks out, he does a short story called The Skull, which is quite interesting. But this is showing to me that the mystics understand that this is about the skull. Now, what is the contradistinction? What is the adversarial, New World Order, anti-stroke Christ attitude towards the skull? Well, it's a total consistent line going back to Babylon, going back to necromancy, going back to the use of the skull to control the spirit, straight up to the skull and bones in America, right through that tradition, straight through the control of the skull, experimentation on the skull, operations on the skull, straight up to Neuralink, in my view. That's utterly. So the magician and sorcerer says we can control, if we control the skull, we control the person and their soul. The spiritual tradition as manifest in Christ, like Jesus Christ said, no, the spirit is transcendent, it's persistent, it supersedes, it's more important, it's not about the control of the brain. And in Celtic mythology, they knew the skull was magical. In some senses, in the Nordic context, you say skull for a celebration. The implication was that they drank out the skull. That's disputed, but there was this connection: the skull of your enemy, etc. Under the Tower of London or Tower Hill, where a lot of people were executed during the Reformation, and that we had, according to legend, the skull of a giant was buried, exactly the same as Adam, exactly the same as Goliath. We have Bran's skull, which was a legendary giant in Britain, Bran. So, and we find this in Welsh legend in particular. So his skull was meant to be buried under the Tower of London, and Britain's success and protection was always meant to have been dependent on this skull. So they knew about the magic skull. So that's another parallel as well. So wow. You control the skull. It's critical in the Celtic context. You control the skull, and you control the human. So the sorceress antichrist adversarial system has invested forever in trying to control human consciousness. That's what its objective is. That's what the greatest game is. This story of Christ tells us that they're pointing to this is what the battle is for. The Christian story points to your ability to transcend that, to your ability to recognize who you are. But there are other connections in the Passion. If we, and of course, when he's coming out of the cave, it refers in many senses to like Plato's cave, escaping from the cave, and in some senses, the stable he was born in was seen to be in a cave. But this cave is critical for hiding you from your true self. It's not just about social control, it's about your true nature. And the Christian story is about escaping from the cave. We escape from the cave by understanding who we are. So there's a multitude of references. Otherwise, we can live in the cave and people can project onto the wall a simulacrum, reality, mainstream news, whatever you want to call it. So there's a few other things that make me believe that this brain consciousness control thing is predicted, anticipated in the story. If we and this is very, very interesting in relation to the particular elements. When he is tortured first, he gets his crown of thorns. So the crown of thorns, if we look at the descriptions by people like Ken Kesey and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that great book which described a lot of what is happening. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or you think of the film with Jack Nicholson, who gets, well, in case anyone hasn't seen it, spoiler alert.
Yeah, my mom's favorite movie.
Oh, it's a fantastic film. It's a fantastic book. It's really, really hit the nail on the head. But so Ken Kesey describes him getting his electroconvulsive therapy, and he describes the machine as a crown of thorns. Now, that is no accident. He's perceiving the similarities between this effort to control the human personality and the crown of thorns put on Jesus. The electroconvulsive therapy was associated with people like William Walter Gray, developed robots. It was associated. He was associated with Hans Berger as well, and they were applying cyber. They told what cybernetics was about. Cybernetics is really about psychiatry, and psychiatry was the origin of a lot of cybernetic. It's about control. So what I am saying is that the perception of these artists are explaining the story of Christ, which is manifest in a passion in particular, which anticipates what is happening to the human race. So the story that happened 2,000 years ago is a description of what has happened, will happen to the human race 2,000 years hence. That's one of the elements. So these are no accidents, because the forces, the dark forces that he is opposing, this occult, sorceress, control, imperial system, you wouldn't be able to fight it on those terms. You would have to fight it on spiritual terms. So we have the crown of thorns. We talked about the chiton, so the gown, the seamless gown, they take off and they put on another robe. But we talked about the chiton, which is the basis of chiton. Now, an interesting point on this, and I did advert to this, but just to elaborate on it, the relic of, or the seamless garment, as it's called, which is a kind of T-shaped, or in some ways, the T shape is important. The seamless garment went to Trier in Germany, and the seamless garment in Trier in Germany, the relic, it was, yeah, there we go. We notice the T. We'll come back to that as well. This was in the town that Karl Marx was. And there's various books written about Karl Marx and the devil, or Karl Marx and Satan, and the idea that he was actually more esoteric. He was more into a kind of occult adversarial system. And in one of the books, which is written by Paul Kenger, I think, he describes how Karl Marx's early poetry, Karl Marx's early poetry makes a reference to this gown in a mocking way, that he was very big on mocking Christianity and religion, and that there was a deliberate juxtaposition of his views and this idea of the spiritual. Now, I think that the seamless garment is another reference to the need to maintain the something. You couldn't separate that. That's why they had a lottery. You weren't meant to divide it up. I think the seamless garment refers to the human aspect, that the biological aspect that we have to keep control of, that we can't let things control. So the seamless garment is really a reference to the garment of the soul, the physiological garment. In September the 12th, 2022, you had in the United States an executive order by that great mind of a president that you had, who obviously was very familiar with all the details of this executive order. And this, on biotech, this explains that you are going to have a biotech economy, for all the good things, to be sustainable, safe. I know you are very interested in safety, our government at the moment. So, and security is loved that, yeah. And so what this says is that the humans, this is what your government doing. On September the 12th is always a day when strange policies are introduced, but I could go on that. It's not an accident, I don't think. But there's a kind of symbology of that as well.
It's kind of like could be 7, so it's like 712, which is kind of close to that 713.
And it comes after September 11.
Yeah.
But it's also when things get done, in response. But it's also, we see this in King Leopold and his conferences about Africa, dividing up Africa. The human body consciousness is being divided up like Africa was divided by the powerful in Europe. This is what's happening. And this says that the human should be programmable down to the cellular level by biotech. This is what you're paying these people to guarantee, for those reasons, that they can program you down to the cellular level. It's quite incredible when it says all that stuff that they do. you're going to live in a bioeconomy. So don't mind about loss of money and all this. You are the currency. It's quite incredible what this thing does. And it gives massive investment on those spurious grounds to enable the collection of biological information so that you are programmable down to the cellular level. If you read through it, you'll find it's not a very long executive order. So this is what they're doing. This is what your government, this is what your taxpayers' money is going to for these guys, which is obviously what the big pharma want. But this is the state giving the Leviathan, giving power to the New Atlantis. This is what it's all about. It's not a fictional thing. So I say that there's a juxtaposition, an anticipation of all of this through the story. And here's another little in relation to the passion context. By the way, when I'm talking about this parallelism between Marxism and, say, Christian revelation or Catholicism or Marian apparitions, there's a strange symmetry that goes through. But I include in the dark side capitalism as well. I include left and right. It doesn't matter if it's a materialist control doctrine. So it's both the communist and the military industrial well, a lot of them are as well, but in relation to those who talk about a free economy, they don't mean that. They mean a crony capitalist feudal system. So it's all of them that I believe are that we have to oppose, or what this story opposes. Now, in relation to, there's another very curious symbology that I began to notice. If we take Fatima in 1917, now, a lot of my friends that don't believe in spirituality, they say, oh, well, we want the evidence, like the thief on the cross. But they don't look at the evidence. They don't examine the evidence. So I say, well, what about Fatima? Oh, I don't know about that. I'm not interested in that. Well, you won't get the evidence. So if we look at Fatima, we had the miracle of the sun, 70,000 people witnessed it. Freemasons, the lot, people are against it, accepted that something miraculous had happened. There's no doubt about that. There's huge amount of witnesses, but still they will say, well, I'm not looking at that, not interested in that. It must be all those people were having some kind of mass hallucination. The fact that the rain dried up and all that, just imagined it, etc. But look at the parallelism of this. This occurred at the time the Bolsheviks were coming into power. It's critical. And there was forewarning about the Second World War, about wars with Russia, etc. It's a critical parallelism. We can go back further. There was a series of Marian apparitions, the Virgin Mary appearing in France in the 1840s, and I refer to La Salette in 1846. It was one of them. It wasn't the only one. But there's a very curious detail. Now, I've studied this. I've read about it in the French and in the dialects and struggled through to read the reports. There's a lot of evidence about this. It wasn't a long apparition, and there's dispute about what the secret message was. There's always a secret message. But and you see the boy Maximin. The more I read about him, if you read on Wikipedia, you get the impression he's a scoundrel. If you read the historical evidence, he was a boy who witnessed something amazing until his death. He continued to vindicate that. After he saw it, he went off to play, but he never varied from his description, despite one incident which can be explained. And when I was over there, I camped near, as it happened, near where he's buried. So I was really interested in the story. It's up in the mountains in Nassalet. But there was a curious detail in this. In 1846, and he said, and she said, that the Virgin Mary had a crucifix on. And on the crucifix, there was a hammer and a kind of tongs on the crucifix.
Oh, wow.
Now, we don't pay attention to what these things are if you're not looking for symbology. So What were those instruments? Why were they? Well, these were the instruments of torture of Christ. Okay, and the hammer for the nails and that. So, and somehow these come into this vision. So this vision comes, and they report for the rest of his life some of the similar details, but this strange thing, and this appears to another nun had a similar thing about which involved these implements. This was at a time of the just before the Communist Manifesto, the revolutionary period, which, when we come to the Bolshevik Revolution, we get the symbols of the Soviet Union. What do we get? We get the hammer and we get the sickle. Now, obviously, these people love farmers. They loved them so much that they killed millions of them. They loved the people so much that they were willing to destroy millions and millions of them in the Soviet Union and in China. Those implements were implements to attack humans rather than to vindicate work. For one of the organizations that became important, and we see this Geneva-London connection, 1864, the International Working Men's Association, again, London, Geneva, critical. They're not interested in working men, as has been shown. How are the working men doing in countries? How are the men doing? They're not interested in these things. It's about a control system, an occult, materialist control system. And these apparitions were indicating that these symbols that were used to persecute Christ were being perverted in a new way. They are being inverted. They're not about cultivating the land, because the environmental destruction that happened in the Soviet Union was huge, as well as the destruction of people. It's about an attack on humanity itself, and that's what these apparitions were warning about. They didn't know anything about these things. Those kids, they couldn't have known. They weren't in the symbols of these organizations at that time. But in the vision is predicting something, as it predicted, as at Fatima. There was a prediction of the sites that would prefigure the Second World War, which was associated with Hitler seeing the what was supposed to be Aurora Borealis just before the Second World War. So right. There's a curious coincidence, and there's another feature which is forgotten about. I've studied, as far as I can, a lot of the early practices in the 20th century in relation to mind control and in relation to psychiatry. Now, we know that we have hysteria, hysterectomy, but all these connections, why they thought people were going mad. If you look at, just take one example of Henry Cotton in the United States, who was in New Jersey, at Trenton. And there's a book written called The Madhouse by, I think, Andrew Scull. So that example. So here's the example of a great psychiatrist that was respected around the world, that was the latest in modernity, the latest in progression, the latest in science. And what he spent all his time doing was cutting out bits of people, was taking bits out, was taking intestines out. When visitors went to the psychiatric hospital, most of the patients had teeth. He didn't have teeth. He believed it was good to take the teeth out. He took their tonsils out, loads of bits out. And other people, if we go back in the 19th century, there was they would if they thought you were mad for a woman, they'd take your clitoris off. Female genital mutilation was ongoing by the scientists. This is what they were doing. And the idea that you can cut something out, it's a shocking story, but this was very, very big on these scientists. So in some ways, the sickle, the knife, is a symbol of a lot of what these guys are willing to do in relation to the treatment of your mind. They did horrendous surgery on people. It's not a long time ago. And it was claimed to be the greatest scientific thing. They were protected by politicians. They were told it was modern medicine. And modern medicine doesn't take cognizance of this. You're told every day about the great scientific world that we live in, the horrendous stories, the things that they did to people. And that's just one example. There's many more. They cut things out of people. They take things out. And this ethos of they call it pseudoscientific practices there. It's easy to say that. If it's not good, they say, well, it's not. Of course, it's pseudoscientific, but it's part of the science. They want the good stuff. Anything bad stuff is not them, it's somebody else, So they can claim it's pseudoscientific. So these instruments used against the human and used against the human mind are well documented. There's many examples we could take of these horrendous things that scientists, the medical establishment have done in all countries in relation. If you look at our knowledge about tooth decay, we see hospitals feeding, with the backing of companies, feeding people in mentally handicapped institutions with sugar to destroy their teeth, for example. It's shocking abuses, horrendous abuses going on. What I'm saying is that there was an anticipation in the Christian story of a desire of the empire to persecute the human, the human as they are, and that this was an anticipation of a continual threat in human experience, but also a future threat that would be pronounced given certain circumstances of an empire, of the use of tools against the human consciousness.
Wow.
So what I would argue is that the dark side aims to control consciousness by controlling the school, using instruments, by denying our spiritual capacity. The spiritual leaders, divine, whether you want to say the Son of God, a prophet, whatever way we want to call it, it doesn't matter. Look at the message. The message explains, anticipates that this thing will happen and is happening. And there's other elements in that. For example, the story of Judas, I think, is very, very relevant, because Judas is the betrayer. Judas, who is the treasurer, who denies Jesus the right to have the expensive oil on his feet, the spikenard, claims he's concerned about the poor. Judas eventually, he wants to please the state, he wants to please the Leviathan, and he sells out Jesus. And he gets his 30 pieces of silver, and he realizes he's made a mistake, and he ends up in the field of blood. He understands that he has made a mistake. In many ways, what I say is this: Judas is an archetypal recurrence. This is of the type you're talking about, the recurrence. It does refer to a betrayal. The betrayal is of humanity itself. The movement now is to say humans are bad, humans are not divine, humans are, and there is a betrayal, often by the professionals, by the professional class, which Judas represents. And the Judas archetype, unfortunately, gets their own bad end. So you don't have to do anything about that. But that's the people who reject the spiritual consciousness for something lesser. So if we take there's other connections. For example, I believe that there's a strong possibility that this T symbol is recurrent in the seamless garment, and there's also a belief that the cross shape was a tau, a TAU, that the cross that he was crucified on was a T-shaped, and this we see in the it's a letter. It's the Franciscans also use it. But it's funny about this. There's a funny kind of esoteric dimension to that Tao as well. If we look at recent studies of the brain and microtubules and Tau X, if we look at connections in the brain, we see that a critical area of study at the moment, as it happens, are called Tau proteins. That's what they're called, TAU proteins. And these are seen to be critical in Alzheimer's, in relation to how the brain functions, in relation to consciousness. So there's weird things. I won't make too much of those connections, but there are parallels that keep coming through and again. Even Franz Gall was one of the leaders in neuro anatomy and physiology of the brain, and again pseudoscience as well. Franz Gall or Gall, Gall, and I find it funny that Gall, you pronounce that, I think, but Gall is actually one of the things that was given mixed with wine to Christ in the English. And now it's different in the other languages, but it's funny parallelism. And interestingly, he was given the wine and the gall, and the gall is, he spat it out. We don't pay enough attention to why he spat it out. And gall was seen to be a pain reliever, a medicament, a pharmaceutical type, if you like, an early one. And he spat it out. He rejected it, despite all the pain and all the suffering, which is another interesting analogy. But we should think about these things. Why are these details so important that they survived, that we know them in different forms? And what is it about that? And we see in that the gall, there's interest in the discussions of what the gall was composed of. And we see there's interesting, again, parallels. We see the wormwood comes up in some context. I don't know if that's true, but wormwood is another feature. Wormwood is the star as well in the book of Revelation. So wormwood is funny, is there somehow. But again, wormwood seems to be both poisonous and a curative. It's in the picture somehow, this wormwood. So what I'm saying is that if we analyze those details, if we compare the details with what other artists have perceived to be significant, well, they keep coming back to these issues, we see an anticipation of the present effort to control the brain, that the aping of the Christian system, it's not just the Christian system, but in particular the Christian system, the aping of the religious system, depends on its control of elements that were laid out in the basis of the Christian story. And in the Christian story, there is an enfolding. So you think it's a map, and you open it up, there's another level. I say that the other level is what we're meant to take now, and also rejecting some of the things that are not really as critical to the story. So a lot of, for example, in many theological discussions, Christ is depicted as antinomian, meaning he's against the law, and there's a lot of debates. Was he rejecting the Jewish law or not? But what he was rejecting was legalism. He was rejecting the legalistic approach to events, or to care, for example, or to as you mentioned about the idea of care. He's rejecting legalism in favor of an intuition, a sense, an instinct. He's not rejecting the law as such, but he's emphasizing this critical element, the reality of this thing of love, if you like. And if you look at C.S. Lewis and his analysis of the Greek concept of love, and he talks a lot about agape. It's strange that agape is associated with a divine type of love, and it has the word ape in it as well, just coincidentally. But it is a good contrast. Agape being the highest form of love, with something which mirrors it, some kind of aping in the sense of copying of that original stuff, the reduction to another form, which is why the military-industrial complex try and reduce our concept of love, because that word love, and as you mentioned, care, in the sense of who we are, is the nature of spiritual consciousness. It's not just about some kind of fanciful escape into some higher dimension. It's about us as incarnated beings realizing who we are and acting in this reality, in this fine-tuned universe, in a way that believes in ourselves and understands the difference between, say, for example, eros and agape, and there's different things, and not to confuse them like the complex will seek us to do. So, in summary, what I say is that what we're facing is the dark mirror, the dark reflection of a light that's there. And if you look at Goethe explained that the rainbow, the spectrum appears between darkness and light. If you think about it, you looking at a rainbow, there will be darkness behind it and the sun will be behind your back. The light, the spectrum, the color appears between lightness and darkness. Now, this is the real rainbow bridge in many senses. This is the real straight path. It's the idea that the area that we live in now, and Goethe had a different idea of light than Newton. He thought that Newton oversimplified what light is and what the rainbow is. So Goethe sees the rainbow appearing between darkness and light. Now that's a description of who we are. We are now in the manifestation between darkness and light. Okay. Now lightness is where we come from, and that's what the mystics are telling us, and we want to go back to. But you have a choice, or you can be confused into going out of the light into the darkness. This is a possibility. All the stories of fallen angels, Satanism, despite what Lucifer said, Luciferianism really, all of those stories are about people, Prometheanism, people who have chosen to go from that narrow rainbow into the darkness and said, okay, well, we can use other elements. We can use other elements to live by, and we reject that. They can't come back into the light. So that's what the mystics say. They say, look to the light. Keep on saying that's who you are. And another last one, another weird little kind of parallelism is that if the fish upturned, or like a pitcher, an amphora with the two ends of the arc pointing upwards, reflect in a way our spiritual antenna, that the fact that we can connect to the universe, the fact that we can connect to God, to the divine, to the supernatural, to the greater consciousness, whatever you want to call it, the great mind, well, then it would explain why the devil has two horns in a lot of pictures.
Oh, wow.
Because why has the devil two horns? He doesn't go around butting people with it, does he? I know there's the horned feature, but it would also explain it as a kind of replication, where this is some kind of reflection, a simulacrum of what is actually our ability, that we have something which is equivalent to antennae, where they metaphorically or actually indicate our capacity to connect to the higher dimension, which all mystics say. And when we're getting an intervention, when you have a mystical experience, you're receiving a message. That's what you're doing. The intervention is natural. It's what we're meant to do. It's why we had this history of the supernatural in a book, I think it was 1864, A History of the Supernatural by Hewitt, which explained, which was set up again to justify the reality of supernatural experience at a time when the X Club was saying we can't have any of this spiritual nonsense. Same counter forces again. So in that sense, while people want to focus on a legalism associated with Christ, I think it's a wrong thing. And Jacob Boehme starts off saying that if you don't understand the signatures of God, you can't understand anything. And these signatures are in the universe itself. And it's even practically relevant. Just to give one practical example of how these things seem to transpire or how these things come again. If we take the figure Victor Schauberger, and I'm sure you've come across him. So Victor Schauberger was a forester in Austria, and he's sitting down, he's looking at fish. He's looking at a fish. But here's the curious thing: the fish salmon of knowledge. He's looking at a fish, and he's saying, well, how can the fish stay still in the water? And then he's saying, well, how can the fish swim up current? We think we know these things, but we don't. And he began to study the fish, and he began to study water, and he began to study vortices, and he began to explain how a fish can swim upstream. And he invented that thing that you put logs on to transport logs that you see in amusement parks. He invented that type of thing to help logs be transported easily. And he invented ways to make rivers flow better because he understood that we weren't paying attention to how the vortices worked. Hitler wanted him to design aircraft for the Nazis. He didn't have any choice. So he developed what was effectively the first flying saucer.
Wow.
Using the principles he learned from looking at this fish, he developed a process of induction where you're sucking things in. So he had, now there's dispute about the exact extent of knowledge that he had. Just after the war, he was invited to America by, it seems like, the CIA. And he said they sent him home and they robbed his stuff. Within a decade, we had flying saucers in the United States.
Oh, wow.
And you also had the X-plane program. Again, X and plane, which was originally set up by the British. And these were the secret aircraft in the United States. Now, there's a very strong chance, and the timing fits in as well, there's a very strong chance that this X-plane thing explains the UFO phenomenon. And of course, Jung comes up with one of his worst things, I think. The saying, well, it's in the psyche and we're projecting out. Totally unconvincing. Don't forget, Jung did work for the forerunners of the CIA. He worked for the Secret Services too. So if you wanted some authority, you would get him to explain why you had these things, projection and all this. There must be a strong chance that Schauberger's inventions were taken or developed or experimented upon or with. And I'm not saying that they reached that. I'm not saying it's the sole explanation, but they were there in some shape or form. And maybe he was anticipating something that does exist out there, but this really has to be considered. And these things, when you use the principles according to him, you would be able to do things that weren't known hitherto. But the whole point was he got all his ideas by sitting looking at a fish. Now, how that works is another thing, but he did, and looking at a fish in water. So this, again, fish, there you go, and those principles. It's quite amazing. Simple thing. And there's, again, this implication of a different level of knowledge, a different type of technology that's associated with a symbol, which is not just about a fish. It's about something which is in the construct of the universe. So these things, when the fish symbol is used in the story, all of these implications are unfolded in it. And when you hear some preacher saying that ye are the salt of the earth and you can lose your saltiness, it just means that your meal won't taste as good. It's like, it doesn't mean anything like that. It's much, much deeper. And what this story is telling us is that now is the time to begin to expose the esoteric meaning so people can understand and make their own choices. And that's what I think C.S. Lewis was, and these figures were beginning to realize, that was influenced by Steiner, who said that Golgotha was the most important event in human history. What Steiner said was that what happened at Golgotha, it was manifest in the etheric domains. You could see it. He said that people in Ireland, as it happened, who were very advanced in these arts, knew this was going to happen. And when it happened, they knew it because it affected the etheric domains. A lot of people won't accept that, but that's what he said. So the Golgotha was critical for him. Whatever way you come at it, there is in this esoteric knowledge which points to our future, and it points to that choice that we have.
Wow. And then, like, it just makes me think of the fish tanks, right? How looking at a fish tank, that's like a universal thing, putting fish in a tank, and then you just look at them and you kind of get into a meditation.
Yes.
With the fishes. I don't know if you ever had a fish tank, but I don't like taking care of them because it's so much work. I had one for like 10 years, but when it was all clean and there, it was very relaxing having it, having that. So I'm going to start.
I went snorkeling in the Great Barrier Reef, and what was remarkable was that, apart from the beautiful environment and the coral reef and all that, that you did really feel that the fish were communicating to you. And I know people would say that's crazy, but you did get a sense of the fish that they were communicating with you. So it's a strange thing, but a very, very peaceful feeling in that environment. Yeah, that's a deep connect. There is a deep connection, and of course, in Chinese culture, the fish is a critical, important symbol. And of course, we couldn't have gone into the water element, which permeates all of this thing, which is even weird when we get to H.G. Wells. I mean, his name it's kind of like a poisoned version of the. There's some strange parallelism in this that the universe has constructed to make us look at the signs. Now, some of them are different levels of interpretation, but I've absolutely, when you get corroboration of a few different events and they point to a certain symbol, they mean certain things, and you have to look at them. And you can look at them in different ways. And the nature of inspiration, intuition, artistic approach will give you clues to where to go to. So one of the things when you're talking about what things we can do, we learn a lot from art, from looking at different representations, for stimulating our own mind, for opening our own mind, for not closing ourselves. This is the great warning. The great warning of this putting on the thinking cap is your mind becomes closed. The implication of these things is to open yourself up, to other people, to open yourself up to the universe, to open yourself up to the reality of inspiration. And for example, Goethe explained that color had a power, that color was critical. As I see going by a painting I did about enthusiasm, which has a reference to Churchill saying about enthusiasm is keeping on going, doing things even if it fails and is unsuccessful. It refers to the original state. So we have to, but the premise of all of that is that you realize that the universe is a magical, mystical place, that many people have explored this. You have to form a connection to some of the historical the historical ideas. You have to look at what's available to us, what other people have laid out, what other people have tried to show us, what other people have tried to communicate with us. That there's millions of people that are on our side, that mean good, that have observations, that can help us understand this. But we have, and that one that just went by, the last one there, was a reference to another, this one down, the colorful one before that. It was a reference to the biblical description in, I think it's Mark 16:12, which is
This one
another
right here.
neglect.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And I contacted biblical scholars about this, and now the dispute about Mark was whether the later bit was added on later on. It doesn't really matter. Some of the later bits that are added on could have been earlier bits that were found. So in Mark 16:12, when Christ appeared to the two men on the road, he appeared in another form. That's what it says.
Oh wow.
And those three words, for me, are revolutionary. They would have been revolutionary if the dark side had understood, well, what does this mean? In another form. And so I was just experimenting with possibilities there, but they recognized him, but he was in another form. So some of these clues are there, but we don't pay attention to them. And the possibilities of what that may mean are revolutionary too. So we're not paying attention. We get these men and women telling us what these things mean as if they have great authority. That one was turquoise healing. It was about a vision I had of a Native American and who was.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Thanks. And the horse.
This is your website. I got your website down below. I'll make sure when I edit the video.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to do a bit of work on that now. I have a bit more time and a lot more paintings to put up.
Now, do you sell these paintings on your website, or is it in a gallery? How does this work? Because you got all your books. I got all your books down below. Everybody go purchase the books. Go check out on the website all of James Tunney's interviews. But how can one get some of these paintings?
I do go out to I do go out to galleries in the last few years with the COVID thing, and with COVID and with the all that stuff going on, and with the realization that we were in the thing now. We're in the final, the end game.
Right.
I just had to write, and I had to leave that aside a bit, but I'm going to come back to it, because I have a number of books in the pipeline that I want to explain to people exactly what's happening. And I mean, I've done that in the last few years because I felt I'm not doing this for the money. I'm not doing this stuff. You don't write books like that quickly, as I want to do, to get them out without doing. I've stayed away from publishers and that because I don't want anyone editing my thoughts. I'm trying to explain to people very, very quickly what's going on.
Oh, I love that.
But I mean, some of the books I wrote, a couple of them were before this, and I did warn about technology. When I came out and did my first interview, and went over to New Mexico, and I did a series of interviews, and it was just January 2020, which was not an accident. And I did warn then that we were facing, people didn't understand it. We were facing the globalization by scientism. So there's in January, I did a talk with Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove on globalization. There it is, the third one from the bottom. And I did say that we were the thing that we had to watch was the globalization by scientism. So I was right on that. In Blue Lies September, the book, I had a kind of a emergency situation which involved lockdown in London. This was just before the thing. I could see it coming, whether people believe that or not. I could see something coming. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew these emergency powers would come up and again leading to control. So what the point is that mysticism is about the connection. And if you have the connection, you should have something to give back. That's what Philip K. Dick was doing. He was explaining, look, you're facing tyranny in America. He said it could be, for example, what he described as left fascism. It was a brilliant description. You know, a left fascism. People say, well, how could that be? And of course, that's based on corporatism. And so what we thought we knew, we didn't know. So he was utilizing his connection. Now, what I say is everybody has this connection. This is our nature. This is our nature to connect to. Now, when we should connect, we shouldn't be connecting to the dark forces because you don't want to go into the darkness. I don't. But maybe people. I don't think they should. I think they should take those things seriously. And all of the great leaders, or if we take the Buddha, and he's talking about the pure land and the light. The lightness is different, but it's still about lightness. It's in terms of lightness and lack of weight is also consistent with light itself. And if we look at David Bohm on frozen light, he argues that the world is light condensed. So there's a lot of evidence for that. What I say is we have to realize who we are. Once we realize who we are, we will not accept tyranny. We won't accept it because we may suffer under it, but we won't accept it. And the sooner, the more mass scale there is, we'll be able to protect ourselves.
Wow.
Jesus told us that this was going to happen. It's in the story for anyone that has eyes to see it. It's in the story. It's predicting what would happen. So that implies that 33 years after his birth, that we're talking about a period 2033, 2035 as the end of it. And that's what I'm saying about singularity. Now, most of the changes are going to happen before that, whether it be economic collapse, collapse of systems, collapse of country, deliberately, order out of chaos. It's written in H.G. Wells' books describing what's going to happen. You know, cultivated war, sending they're trying to send all the young people off to war now, as well as killing their grannies. They have to resist that. You can't. You must have learned by now that dying for your country is no glorious thing. I understand in certain cases, but not when it's mass industrialized, strategic use of a population in order to achieve objectives for an upper class. We have to stop it now. We have to begin to understand what's going on. We have to be more comprehensive. We have to understand who our opponent is. We have to open our minds up. We have to support each other. We have to believe in ourselves. We have to not be demoralized. And once you fill yourself with a spiritual vision, there won't be room for demoralization. The demoralization occurs in that kind of God hole, as they call it, in the space occupied where they've ripped something out of us, where they rip something out of our mind, where they work on the hippocampus and they work on your memory. They want to denigrate who you are, where you came from, what you are, put you into a compartment, classify you, reduce you, set you against someone else. We have to resist it. And we have to have the imagination, the boldness, the coherence, the ability. And the other strange thing is that once you do open yourself up genuinely, and this is what Maslow learned, that people with a mystical experience become the self-actualized people, become the successful people. I'm not saying that that's the be-all and end-all. It's not material success. They become happy. They become better at doing what they want to do. And that's because they submit to the spirit, the great spirit, God, and then they can achieve things. Then they are not as concerned about some other things down. Then they can survive challenges below, but they will also be successful at what they're doing. So the self-actualization people, and why he studied it was because these had moved beyond concern about their house and their safety and love, acceptance. And they moved up higher beyond love and all those of someone else to that thing. And that thing, the self-actualization, was associated in most cases with them having had some mystical experience. They go together. So the commitment to your own belief in your spiritual consciousness begins to yield fruit to you. The fruit of the Spirit, the gifts of the Spirit, the siddhis, if you like, in the Vedantic terms and Indian terms. So they follow on, and they even have implications for your success in this world. And I don't mean that in a material sense, although a lot of those people were materially successful. And there's a lot of people who have been materially successful who say, hold on a second, this is not the self-actualization. And I've come across them as well. And this is a real thing. They understand it. So the people who have it all say, hold on, this doesn't give me what it is I want. So you have that. You always have that. This is available it's available to you to see the world as beautiful. It's available to you to see yourself as a magnificent, divine creature. Now, I don't mean you go around prancing but in your inner vision, with your inner eye, to see other people in that way, to see the magnificence of the environment around us, and therefore to be justly indignant and horrified at the attempt to reduce it to a mechanical simulacrum that copies this wonder, and not to be depressed or misled. Now, I know there's loads of kind of physiological reasons, but there's a lot of it is existential. A lot of it is because people are told they're nothing. And when you keep on telling people they're nothing, when you isolate them, they begin to believe it and they begin to act consistently. So we have to really believe that. If that fundamental attachment you have is to the highest divine good, even in Greek term, but if your attachment is to that, and your attachment, before we become ashes, as we all will, before we become dust and blown away, before we go into the ground, before whatever happens to us, if that is a fundamental part of our existence, if we can operate in that dimension like a fish operates in a different dimension, if we can accept that dimension as part of our daily lives, and that's what thy kingdom come means in the Our Father, when Jesus, thy kingdom come, really means as well that we enter into this commitment to the God forces, to the heavenly forces, and it's part of our life. So once we're connected to that, it doesn't matter what happens to us in one sense, but it also gives us a better strategy, a better disposition, a better hope in relation to dealing whatever things are set up to be adversarial to that wants to invert it. So I don't want anyone to be depressed by anything that I say, and hope is important, and don't be demoralized. You don't be demoralized by having some kind of moral code, some honor, and I mean that's simple in all the things. Love God, or have some respect for the ultimate creation, and love your neighbor, love the person who's around you. It doesn't mean that you have to think everyone's great, but I mean you don't have ill will towards them. You recognize them irrespective of any other difference, and you treat them accordingly. It's not rocket science. We're not asked to do much. And then if we put in the other ones, the Chinese, the Irish, the Celtic, nature is a critical part of that. It's the immanent divine. Respect nature. And then the intelligence, if it comes out in harmony with the other things, will serve us and will solve the problem. And the opponents is that non serviam. They won't serve a higher force than themselves, and that's the mistake, and that's the opposition. That's the Promethean force, the satanic force, the materialist force.
Yeah, I got the donut, right? But the donut hole, there's the hole in the donut that needs to be filled and become donut hole with a W. And
yes, yeah. That's good. When we stick the jam on there, and that was when Jesus was healing. The words holy, heal, and whole are all connected in different languages. So
wow.
what you have to be is whole in the entire sense, integrated, And you can only be whole if the spirit is primary. It doesn't mean that you reject your physical, it's critical. That's why in this story, the divine force comes into or is incarnated. It's also showing that this incarnation, the salt of the earth, is critical in the story. For whatever reasons, it's difficult to work out, but we're talking about a fine-tuned universe, number 137, the one, the ratio, and different constants, which make life unique, which scientists dismiss in many senses. But this universe has very unique characteristics, and certainly we have to adapt to the natural world. But spiritually, we have to evolve. That's where the evolution has to happen and become whole. And once we're whole, and by that I think that means you recognize your spiritual and your physical and your mental things. But really, you cannot put the spiritual above the other things. As I see that guy Johnston, who believes in transhumanism and extending his life. Well, Christ said, "He that gains his life will lose it." Meaning, if you're focusing just on your physical life, you won't get it. So that's
this is nuts, right? I just looked up what's the 137 day of the year. It's May 17th. That's my sobriety date. That's when I got sober 9 years ago.
Well, that's a double vindication of the divine intervention context. The nature of the universe.
That's God. That's nuts. Yeah. That's wild.
Yeah. So congratulations on that, and
that was the worst. That was a very bad day. Like, it was not a good day. But it turned out. But like you could see, but that's where I started to believe in God again, and I also started doing these videos in January 2020 as well. So, and I just had this, I got to get information out there about what I saw with the lockdowns.
Well, that's very interesting, because I wasn't interested in doing public stuff. I'd done plenty of lectures and I was happy, just looking after the kids, painting, minding my own business, writing. I didn't want to, but I felt a compulsion. I didn't really have any choice to come out and do this. And now it's difficult to get out because you understand that you have to play a role. And the first book was The Mystical Accord, and it came in a mystical way to me. And the Mystical Accord is based in it's an introduction, and there's lines written in haiku form. It's not very kind of loose haiku, but every one of the lines in it has 17 syllables, because 17 is a critical number. So you're May 17th. 17, as I tried to explain in the book, is a critical esoteric number. Not least, the Freemasons set up 1717. It's a critical number in it, and 17 becoming 8, the octave. So that lay behind as well my approach in the Mystical Accord. The Mystical Accord, I tried to explain it in lines because they came to me that way. Most of the lines came in that form. So I'd say, is it 17 syllable? And I'd kind of filter it that way.
Wow.
And not all of them, but a lot of them did. And certainly the first few lines did. And when the lines came to me, I wasn't thinking about these things. I wasn't thinking about what this meant. Or they didn't seem to come from me. They didn't seem to be consciously constructed. I understand that people say, well, it's a subconscious and it has to be and all that. But my perception was that I didn't consciously come up with the key lines and that was just my sense. All of a sudden, there's been a certain failure of spiritual evolution. I was playing with my daughter in going to in being late for school, playing in trees because there were you can't. I couldn't resist playing on the way in these lovely apple trees, and this line came when I was walking back home. And I was saying, well, what's that mean? Where did that come from? I knew it came from, didn't seem to be cognitively constructed. So I began to write them down. And then out of that came this idea. It was a kind of vindication of mysticism, but it was also explaining that what we have to do is to come into accord. God, the universe, nature, other beings. It's this coming into accord, and that's the critical thing. Explaining what that means, explaining the difference between yourself, your false self, and your true self. That your true self is something which is beyond time and space. Your spirit,
It's
and
like
we have to
playing a chord. Like
accord exactly, yeah, which
you
goes
hit.
back, which also goes back to Pythagoras and these ideas and the chords and the all of this mystical stuff was associated with the idea of the universe was like an instrument, and a chord means agreement, and but 17 again is another number which is recurrent, and of course we see it in relation to Marian apparitions. There's a whole range of context. 17 is a very important number. It's one of these critical ones, along with, I believe, 9, along with 137. Again, 137 has the 1 and the 7 in it, with 3 in the middle. But
Oh yes,
yeah,
yes.
so it is a remarkable number. I didn't understand it when I was setting out to write that, and it's an odd thing to write so many lines and as it happened, I just put it out myself, and there was a lot of people at home, some well-known people as well, successful people that had time to read it, which probably wouldn't have time in normal circumstances.
Sure.
And it made an impact on a number of people. So that was a good thing, and it kind of they begin to prove themselves. The things do their own work. They begin to, they work on their own. They're self-contained things. They become things that act like some of the medical agents that the state provides or sets out. A lab leak. There's also mystical leaks where we begin to talk to other people, to incite other people in a positive sense as well. So yeah, just 17 again.
I got them links down below. Make sure to grab these books. This is the one I'm going to read first, is The Mystery of Trapped Light. I definitely want to read this poems book, but now I'll probably read this one first, knowing that.
The trapped light explains it explains this idea that we're all light, that all of the mystical things is based on light and what that means. And again, as we tried to talk about in light, the salt, light, and what that actually means, and what that means for the military-industrial complex and how they see it. And another thing to mention is that these things, they don't understand these things. For example, water. Again, I've talked to top scientists that work in these areas. They don't understand the full crystalline possibilities and potential of water. They're studying. They don't know them. So we think we know them. We don't know them. We think it's a simple substance. There's much more complexity, and that's what the unfolding is. Every time there's dark unfolding, there's a positive unfolding, and the positive warnings come out before the dark things. And they tell us we must look at the dynamic interplay, the yin and yang, and perhaps some argue that this adversarial thing is inherent in nature. It's just a duality, but that may be true. But we still have to transcend it. We don't transcend it, we'll be on the dark side. So we don't want to feed it. I don't want to. I believe in these dark places. I believe in these unenlightened places, in these places which we don't want to be. And the way we do that is by focus on the true light, as it's called in John's Gospel, and not be led by artificial light and things which seem to be or reproduce. And that light is a simple thing. It's coterminous with care and love, not in any soppy way, not in a false way, because a lot of people misrepresent care. They misrepresent love. I for example, I don't know if I mentioned before, but if you look at a lot of people like Christopher Hitchens, who said in his early days that he wanted to wade through, he was willing to wade through an ocean of blood to get to his paradise, because he was a Trotskyist, and that's what his vision of. You have to be careful about what the people are and what they're saying, and not to be misled about some things that look good, look intelligent, look clever. If that thing at the heart of if there's no spiritual base to it, it's very, very difficult to construct something that's lasting. I'm not saying that a humanist who doesn't believe in the supernatural can't, but it's very, very difficult, because a lot of our conceptions of what the human is come from these things, and they are going to take them away. The forces are. So yeah, I've attempted to grapple with some of those things, some of those concepts, and feeling a great sense of urgency. I could have sat around for years and years and perfected them, polished them, and all, but they came, and I tried to communicate them as quickly as I could. And I've a lot more in the pipeline before I'm finished.
Right. No, yeah, I released my first PDF, and I didn't have everything solid. I just put what I knew, and all the things, they're not like broken down in detail, but it's all the stuff that has happened, that has been played out. So I'm pretty proud of myself for having that insight. And we were talking about salt and light, and I got the salt lamp. And just think about the
Yeah.
salt lamp, how it's salt, light, and it's like radiating this salt, removing the positive ions of technology and balancing it out with the negative ions, which is
Very good. Yeah.
yeah, that's wild. Well, I'm so grateful to have you here again. And I mean, James, you bring hope. You get rid of the demoralization, so talking with you definitely brings hope to me, inspiration, and so much. And I appreciate all these topics, you coming on here, spending the time with you. And I got all your links down below. Everybody go support James Tunney and get these books. I'm definitely going to start off with the light and the accord and the poem. Those are what I'm going to start off with. And I would love to have you back after I read those, or anytime you'd like. This presentation has been absolutely awesome. So I know my audience is going to really appreciate it as well. Any closing thoughts?
No, just thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you. It's interesting to learn about you. It's great to see your work. It's interesting, in particular, to hear about your personal story, because they're the things that register, behind. You get a better picture in your hippocampus about the real person. And then there is a thing that happens, which I've called the mystic murmuration, that we begin, and there will be no single organization that will solve this problem. Those possibilities are gone. We're going to evolve a different strategy, which will be a mass strategy, which involves actual communication at a different level. And those actual communications happen when you have a bond with people, a connection with people. You can begin to communicate, come into accord, resonate with people, and that's where power will come about. So I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank your listeners as well, because there's some very kind comments, and people have contacted me, and I appreciate all those people out there, and it vindicates, if you feel that you're saying something which is useful, which a number of people tell me, and it's practically useful for them, that they can understand something that impacts on them. Well, then I'm delighted, that in that sense, that gives me great pleasure, and gives me fuel as well to try and explain the thing. And it is hopeful, and we can form connections. There will be different types of organizations, connections on a different level, on a spiritual level as well, that's going to emerge. And this is part of the creation of the next phase of humanity. The one that will triumph, it will be the spiritual consciousness, and it will be the meek that inherit the earth, surprisingly. and the emphasis is going to shift. So I want people to be very positive, and I'm grateful if I can contribute anything to that. And thank you again, Donut, and we hope we got that jam on the donut as well. And good luck with your own explorations. Thank you.
Thank you. And I hope you stay on just for another minute as I close out. Thank you, everybody. Smash that like button, hit subscribe. Much love, and God bless you.
God bless.